Where did it all go wrong? I don't mean the kind of wrong where everything falls apart overnight. I mean the kind where you slowly become someone you don't recognize. One day you're excited about things. You have hobbies, you have plans, you have this idea of who you're going to become. And then somehow you wake up years later and realize you haven't thought about any of those things in a long time. And you can't even remember exactly when it happened. There wasn't some huge moment where everything changed. There wasn't a single day where you decided to give up on yourself. It was smaller than that. You stopped doing one thing, then another. You told yourself you'd get back to it later. You got busy, you got tired. You started prioritizing the things that felt more important. And eventually, the things that once mattered to you became the things you used to do. That's the scary part. Sometimes your life doesn't fall apart, it just slowly becomes something you never intended it to be. I've thought about this before. I look at certain parts of my life now and think about how different they are from what I imagined when I was younger. There were things I wanted to learn, things I wanted to create, things I wanted to experience, and I did end up picking a lot of those different hobbies and skills, like music, archery, learning new things, going to the gym, trying to improve myself. But even with all of that, there are still moments where I wonder if I'm actually moving toward the person I wanted to become, or if I'm just keeping myself busy. And maybe you felt that too. You wake up, you go to school or work, you come home, you go on your phone, you watch something. You scroll for a while, you tell yourself you'll do something tomorrow, and then you do it again, and again, and again. And eventually, you don't even feel like you're wasting time anymore. It just becomes your life. That's what makes it so difficult to notice. We expect our lives to change through huge decisions, but most of the time they change through repetition. The things you do every day eventually become the person you are, and the things you keep avoiding eventually become the things you regret. That's a difficult thought, because it means some of the things we blame on circumstances might actually be the result of hundreds of tiny decisions we barely notice. Decisions like one more hour on your phone, one more day without starting, one more excuse, one more promise that you'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow keeps coming. But the version of you that you keep promising to become never does. I think that's where regret starts, not when you fail, but when you realize you stopped trying. Because failure at least means you attempted something, you had a chance, you learned something. But there's something uniquely painful about knowing you could have tried and simply didn't. You start thinking about all the things that could have happened. What if I had started earlier? What if I had stayed consistent? What if I had taken that opportunity? What if I had stopped caring about what people thought? What if I had just gone for it? And the worst part is that nobody can answer those questions. You can't go back and find out. You can only imagine. And sometimes your imagination can create a version of your life that feels better than the one you're actually living. And that's very dangerous. Because you can become so attached to the person you could have been that you stop paying attention to the person you can still become. I think that's something I had to understand. There is a version of me that I could have been. There are probably hundreds of them. Different choices, different opportunities, different habits, different people, different paths. I'll never know what those lives would have looked like. Neither will you. At some point, you have to stop mourning every possible version of yourself that you lost and start putting the one that's still available. Because you're still here, and that matters. You might have wasted time, you might have made mistakes, you might have spent years doing things you wish you hadn't. You might have let opportunities pass because you were scared. You might have disappointed yourself, but none of that changes what you do next. And I think that's where the question changes. Instead of asking yourself, Where did it all go wrong? You eventually have to ask, what am I going to do now that I know? Because maybe the point isn't to find the exact moment everything went wrong. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe life just happened. Maybe you changed. Maybe the people around you change. Maybe your priorities change. Maybe you lost motivation. Maybe you were dealing with things nobody else could see. Or maybe you were simply young and didn't know any better. You don't have to punish yourself over that forever. You can acknowledge it, you can understand it, and then you can move on. But moving on isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's incredibly boring. It's going to the gym when you don't feel like it. It's studying when nobody's forcing you to. It's putting your phone down. It's going outside. It's picking up the hobby you abandoned 3 years ago. It's opening the unfinished project. It's sending a message. It's applying for the opportunity. It's going to sleep instead of staying awake until 3 in the morning wondering why your life isn't changing. It's doing something small enough that you almost feel stupid for calling it progress. But it is progress. Because a life doesn't change when you think about changing it. It changes when your behavior changes. And I think that's something we forget. We spend so much time thinking about the person we want to become that we confuse thinking with doing. You can watch 100 of these motivational videos. You can read 100 books. You can make 100 plans. You can do everything. You can write down your goals, talk about your future, and still wake up exactly where you are. Knowledge doesn't change your life by itself. Action does. And that's uncomfortable because action gives you something to lose. If you never start, you can always tell yourself you could have been great. But if you start, you might fail. You might discover you're not as good as you thought. You might embarrass yourself. You might have to admit that the thing you imagined isn't actually what you wanted. But at least you know. And knowing is better than spending your life wondering and missing out on that opportunity that the person could have become is gone because you didn't start now. And I've realized that some of the pressure I put on myself came from being afraid of being left behind. That's part of why I started learning more, why I cared so much about improving myself, why I started going to the gym, why I became so focused on becoming better. I didn't want to wake up one day and realize everyone else had moved forward while I was still standing in the same place. But there's a problem with constantly being afraid of falling behind. You can become so focused on catching up that you forget to ask where you actually go. You can spend years improving yourself without ever stopping to decide what you're improving for. And maybe that's another way things can go wrong. You become productive without being fulfilled, you become disciplined without knowing why, you become successful at a life you don't even want. That's why I think you have to occasionally stop. Not to give up, but to look around. Look at your life. Look at the people you're surrounded by. Look at how you're spending your time. Look at what you care about. And ask yourself whether the life you're building actually belongs to you. Because it's very easy to build a life based on expectations. Your parents' expectations, your friends' expectations, society's expectations. The version of success you've seen online, the person you think you're supposed to become. And maybe one day, just one day, you reach everything you were told to want and still feel empty. That's when you realize achievement and meaning aren't the same thing. You can accomplish something and still feel like something is missing. Maybe what's missing is you. The person you were before you became obsessed with being impressive. The person who tried things because they looked interesting. The person who didn't need every hobby to become productive. The person who didn't turn every interest into another way of measuring their own worth. The person who could enjoy something without asking whether it was going to make them successful. I think we lose that part of ourselves slowly, but I don't think it's gone forever. You can pick things up again, you can start again, you can change your mind, you can become interested in something you haven't thought about in years. You can decide that the path you're on isn't yours anymore. And yes, starting over can be embarrassing, especially when you think you should have already been further ahead. I feel the same way. But nobody benefits from staying somewhere just because you're already spending time getting there. Time you've already spent is gone. Don't spend more of it protecting the decision that wasted it. And maybe that's the hardest part about growing up. You eventually realize nobody's coming to tell you that or what your life is supposed to become. There isn't always going to be a wake up call. There isn't always going to be some dramatic moment where it gives you the sudden clarity to change. Sometimes you just have to notice that you're unhappy, notice that you're drifting, notice that you're spending your life waiting, notice that you're becoming someone you don't want to be, and then you do something about it. Not everything, just something. Because you don't need to rebuild your entire life overnight. You just need to stop making the same decision that got you here. If you don't like where you're going, change your direction. If you don't like what you're doing every day, change your routine. If you don't like who you're becoming, change what you're repeatedly doing. It's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And maybe years from now, you'll look back at this period of your life and realize it wasn't where everything went wrong. Maybe it was where you finally noticed. Maybe it was a point where you stopped waiting for your life to change and started changing it yourself. Because there will always be another year, another month, another Monday, another tomorrow. But eventually, you run out of them. And I don't want to spend my life looking backward and wondering where everything went wrong. I want to be able to look back and know that when I realized I was heading in the wrong direction, I turned around. Maybe that's all you need to do. Not become perfect. Not become someone completely different. Just turn around. Take the first step. Then another and another. Because your life isn't only defined by where you ended up. It's also defined by the moment you decided you weren't staying there. And if you're watching this years from now, maybe you barely remember the person you are today. Maybe you'll be stronger, maybe you'll be smarter, maybe you have done things you can't even imagine right now. Or maybe you're still figuring things out. That's okay. Or maybe, hopefully, you remember this video. The video that pushed you. And just don't let the future version of you look back at your life and wonder why you never tried. Don't make them ask, where did it all go wrong? Give them a better answer. The answer that's where I decided to change. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you have a wonderful day. Good night.